Hello everyone. In this tutorial we will see how to simulate some stitches on an object using the Substance Painter 2019 brushes on the mask of a material which, as we will see, will have the height parameter activated, which allows us to simulate those elements. We will see two things in a single tutorial. How to simulate raised parts using HeightMap, in this case with uniform height. How to use brushes in order to define an opacity mask for a material or a layer. I'm creating a new project with the PBR Metallic Roughness Algorithmic template using the 3D model of a belt. I'm going to apply two different materials to different parts of the object using the masks and the UV Chunk Fill tool. In the description of the video, you'll find a link to this asset. Anyway, you don't have to get this object. You can just watch the tutorial and learn the technique, which is also valid in other cases. I'm using the Cobalt Pure material for the buckle. As for the strap, I'm using artificial leather, in both cases with the default settings of the materials. At the top of the object's stack of materials, in layers, we now add the material we want to use for the seams. I'm using a fabric-type material. The material will be applied to the whole object, which obviously is not a good thing. To limit the effect, however, this time we proceed in this way. We create a folder, in which we will put both the fabric material and the height fill layer, which will implement the stitches. We will create the mask with the brush to the folder, not for individual layers, so as to apply the mask to all layers. Let's click with the right mouse button on the fabric material and, from the menu that will appear on the screen, choose Group Layers. Then, let's click on Add a Fill Layer at the top of the Layer tab to create a basic fill layer, in which, however, we will disable all channels except height, that of the stitches, in the Properties Fill tab. Let's change the value of the height parameter, raising it to 0.2 for example. A negative value will instead produce dimples. On screen, we will not see any difference, for the simple reason that, at this moment, the effect is applied to the entire surface of the object. In order to appreciate it, we will have to limit it to seams only. Let's drag the fill layer inside the folder created a moment ago. Let's right-click on the folder that groups the height fill layer and the fabric material, then choosing Add Black Mask from the menu that will appear on the screen. Let's select the mask and click on the Paint tool. We can find it in the Tools toolbar, below the main menu. With the default settings, we should be able to paint immediately on the model, or, rather, on its layer mask, with a brush blurred at the edges and with the pure white color, which means that we will set the areas of the layer mask to white where we do the brush strokes. This will make the materials in the folder show up. We can find more brushes in the Brushes section of the shelf. I'm not going to list them all here, but I invite you to try them and change their settings in the Properties Paint tab, where there are many parameters which, in most cases, have intuitive meanings. However, the main ones are size, the size of the brush stroke; spacing, the separation between a brush stroke and the following one, when clicking and dragging. We will soon see a practical example. Angle, the angle of application of the drawing of the brush stroke. With brushes without particular direction or shapes, such as basic hard, this parameter does not say much, but the effects will become more clear with other brushes, such as that of the stitches. Grayscale, usually located at the bottom of the tab, allows us to specify the gray value to be applied on the mask. Intuitively, setting this value to 0, black, we will make black brush strokes on the mask, thus removing the effects in those areas, so we can use a brush like an eraser. Let's delete all brush strokes simply by right-clicking on the mask and choosing Add Black Mask from the menu, then move on to the actual topic of this tutorial, the stitches. In the Brushes section of the shelf, let's write stitches in the search box to filter the elements based on this name. By default, Substance should show 5 brushes with this feature. The first brush on this list will be fine. Let's select it with a double click. By clicking and dragging the brush on the object, we will see the creation of the stitches. We are not painting on the actual material, but on the layer mask of the folder that contains both the material and the fill layer for the stitches. The basic brush settings allow us to set the size and space between one dash and another. However, drawing on curved geometry like this is not very comfortable. We then move on to the 2D view to view the UV layout of the object and act directly on this representation which, since the object is represented on a two-dimensional plane, and that the layout has been done quite well, in the sense that the parts of the strap are straight, it is much more comfortable. Especially if we use the following shortcut. We click the left button and immediately release it where we want to start. Then press the Shift button and, keeping it pressed, click the left button and drag the mouse cursor to the endpoint. Finally, we can release both Shift and the left mouse button. We have just drawn a line and we can also use this technique for other stitches, or to draw other straight lines. Plus, by pressing the Shift-Control keys, before clicking with the left button, we will draw with a snap at predetermined angles. They should be, by default, 22.5 degrees. So on the unstitching of this model we can draw, in fact, perfectly straight lines. The Properties Paint tab of a brush has, as seen, many parameters, some of which allow us to introduce randomness between one stroke and another, for example by varying the dimensions or the rotation angle of the various strokes. However, I will talk about it in other tutorials, with practical applications. In this tutorial, dedicated to the stitches, we just need the previously described tools, i.e., size, spacing, and angle of the strokes, without randomness or other effects. In case of error in the definition of the points, don't worry. The mask is a grayscale image and, as we have seen, it can be modified using brushes, which can also be set to black or white, so we can remove any error, both in 2D and 3D views, by selecting the layer mask of the folder, choosing a harder brush, for example, Basic Hard, setting its color to black and using this brush on the parts to be fixed. The effects will affect all the materials and the layers of the folder, which we will not therefore have to fix one by one. The folders can also be nested and their masks will also be. So for example we can insert this folder inside another one by right-clicking on the folder and choosing Group Layers. Now we can define a new layer mask for the folder, even with a different technique. For example, we could use the UV chunk fill technique, or, since this object allows me to do it, the mesh fill mode, which selects the connected geometries, even if belonging to different UV islands, and select only the belt. In this way we will be able to make a first rough selection of the parts to be influenced, followed by more detailed selections with the nested folders and masks. It is also a method that avoids the creation of stitches on parts of the object that should not be affected. The use of materials and layers within a folder, delegating the definition of the application areas to the folder mask, provides us with some flexibility in modifying the parameters of the materials even later. In fact, we can now open the fill layer and change the value of the height parameter, or change the color and other parameters of the material, without having to worry about the mask of these materials. Because the mask has been defined for the folder and is applied to all its elements, such as seen in the case of error correction. In summary, in this tutorial we have seen several things: how to group multiple layers and materials in a folder, and in nested folders too, in order to define the layer mask for the folder and control the application of multiple effects. How to create a layer for the height channel only, so as to create bumps of uniform intensity. How to draw on a layer mask with brushes, also taking a look at the main parameters of these tools in the Properties Paint tab. How to make stitches with Substance Painter's special brushes, creating, among other things, straight lines in 2D view, working directly on the UV layout, using shortcuts. So, that's all for this tutorial. As usual, I invite you to express doubts, questions or requests for clarification in the comments to the video.